All right, as we are waiting for other folks to join us, I want to point out some things before we begin. First and foremost, I think I've gotten all the grades up to date. If you are missing assignments, please check the grade book and submit accordingly. I will not penalize for lateness, but please just get it in. There are some folks where I gave half credit to, where in the ePortfolio assignment that was due, I was asking for a page for your co-op experiences and a page for your involvement or activities or projects. And so if you have that and you didn't publish it, that's fine. Let me know when it's updated and I'll give you the points. And so it's not a one-shot deal. We can improve on the points and get you the full credit that you need. All right. I am in the process of finalizing placements. And so if you are set to go back, you will get an email confirmation from me of your placement going back to your co-op employer for the summer semester. Please note that there are emails that have gone out telling you that you need to register for the co-op semester. We are now moving into a process where students will be responsible for registering for the co-op semester. That's going to avoid any confusion and really it's going to make things a lot smoother in the long run. You wouldn't believe the number of classes that number of students where we've had to back register because we couldn't register them in the first go around because of a block or something that was on their account. And so moving forward, students will be required to register for the co-op semester. And so you should have gotten an email from our placement system. If not, go into One Stop and look up the co-op class. Most of you will be taking will be in co-op 4012. Some of you will be in co-op 4011, which is the 4th semester. Just look in One Stop and look for me as the instructor for that course. Okay. So today's topic is something that I've been working on and talking about for a number of years now, dating back to actually when I was in graduate school. And at one point in time, I was supervising our diversity education program here at the university. Are known as the RAP program, Racial Awareness Program. It is the second oldest program in the country that talks about and facilitates discussion on race. And so this is also a topic that has become important in the last few years as it relates to hiring processes and the events that have happened over the last couple of years. But I will say that when it comes to this topic, it is almost impossible to cover everything and cover the topic of diversity and inclusion and cover it within the span of one class session. Okay, but what we'll try to do is cover at least these two objectives, where we will explore the value of diversity and collaboration in the workplace. And I have some videos to share with you on that one. And then methods of overcoming stereotypes, right? And when it comes to decision making. And so when we think about the idea of diversity and inclusion, it is a term within HR and also within your industries. Many companies are moving to a trend where there is a strategic process in hiring underrepresented populations into the work and having them in their workforce. At the same time, also there is strategy in how to leverage that diversity of thought, diversity of thinking, and collaboration, right? But to kick things off, I want for you to think about diversity and inclusion in the idea of a hiring process. Okay, think about it. You're a hiring manager and you have candidates to fill with for a job on your team, right? And so let's say hypothetically that you're the hiring manager, you have one spot on your team and these are your candidates. Based on these images, who would you pick? Hold on to that thought. Don't share that out and don't blurt out the answer. But think about it. As you view these images, what assumptions do you have of the individual or individuals? Okay. These images are intentional. These images also portray individuals in many different ways. When you put all the images together, what you have is a project known as Our Kind of People, which examines the how clothing, ethnicity, and gender affect our ideas about identity, personality, and character. The subjects in these photos are dressed based on their wardrobe, right? The outfits are worn in a style and fashion similar to how they would wear them in regular life, right? Devoid of any context for assessing the personality of the individual in the photograph, viewers project their own cultural biases on the photograph. These images may be presented in a series or grouped together by subject or mixed together with images of various subjects next to each other. This project was put together by Bayet Ross Smith, who is an educator and artist in New York. Okay. But again, as you look at these images, what are your assumptions? Or what are your biases? Oftentimes when we consider our assumptions and our biases, that we have this unconscious stream of thought, okay? And so I have a short video for you that sort of plays into that a little bit and talks about that a little further.
New research from the fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague, or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking, and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs. For more information on the nature of unconscious bias and how to mitigate its effects, contact ENEI.
So in the end, when we think about our biases, right? The important thing I want to stress is that it's important to recognize those behaviors associated with your biases. Okay, the Ohio State University Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity goes on to state that unconscious bias or implicit bias are the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Okay, so what we're talking about here are specific characteristics where our biases are pervasive, right? Everyone possesses them, even people with commitments to impartiality. Okay, implicit and explicit biases are related but distinct mental constructs. Okay, and so they're not mutually exclusive, and they may reinforce each other, right? Implicit associations we hold do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs or values. Okay, and so just know that what you may think about implicitly may not be necessarily aligned with your actual values, right? We generally hold our biases that favor our in-groups, okay? And the final characteristic to think about when it comes to our biases is that they're malleable, right? And so it's not something that is ingrained in us and etched in stone or anything of that sort. I firmly believe that as you expose yourself or place yourself in situations where you challenge your biases, you then change, right? And so that's just one thing to keep in mind. Have another video for you, and this talks about the idea of how our biases now start to play into our work as engineers. Okay, and so here's an example of a company that actually recognizes our biases and our implicit assumptions, right? And how it impacts the products and services that we render.
What would the world look like if everybody were aware of the stereotypes that they have and the biases that they have? When we talk about unconscious bias, we're basically saying our worldview can actually exert an influence beyond our conscious awareness, and it creates ambiguity.
You go to an engineer who's built something extremely innovative, and you say, who do you think your user is? This is where I have the most fun. My name is TV Raman, and I led our work on Android accessibility for 3 years. Write down everything that you think you know about your user with respect to abilities, inabilities, special abilities, disabilities. Almost every assumption that you write down on that whiteboard about this is the user I think I'm building for is questionable, because our various unconscious biases define the boundaries you're unwilling to expand.
These biases, they're the shortcuts that our brain has created so that we can deal with the information that we process every single day.
Right when we see anyone, whether we think about it or not, we are implicitly, automatically making judgments about how warm, incompetent that person or thing is.
All humans need to make decisions, and so we fill in the blanks because our brains are wired to do that, and we fill in with things we don't know with past experience. Oh, you pattern map to someone I think I should hire, so I'm going to hire you versus this person because they didn't map, because I can't fill in the blank because they don't look like me or they're not from my same background, and so I can't see how they're going to make the jump.
Every single person is great at things that you may not expect them to be, but it's really hard for us to see that when we're so powerfully guided by the things we expect to be true in the world.
I grew up surrounded with this conversation about what you can't do and what you won't be able to do. My name's Enrico, and I'm an autistic software engineer. The first time I go through the performance review process, I was asked for 5 strengths. It was the first time that I had ever been prompted to think in that way about myself. And it was really a life-changing moment for me.
When we are working in our day-to-day jobs, we are still making judgments about the people around us, about the resumes we see, about the employees that we're trying to decide, whether to put them on teams or not.
People are very wedded to the idea that they can perceive something objectively, and statistically they're wrong. But it's hard. You become attached to this idea that you can assess something by looking at it.
These subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects on who we're promoting, who we're hiring, who we're putting in leadership positions. We have the responsibility to understand the assumptions that we make and understand the errors that we make.
But it's not just for the collective good. If you take the time to understand more about this, there are things that you can implement for yourself that'll help you develop as a leader and to do your job even better.
It made me realize how often I have a very strong belief that is simply incorrect. When I look at one of these evaluation situations, the first question is, how can I eliminate the sources of potential bias and leave just the data so we can actually make better decisions?
If you're not conscious of the biases that you have, you're just not contributing at the level that you could, and you're not innovating at the level you could. And so your products won't be as good. Your results won't be as good.
When you think outside the box with respect to the assumptions you made about how somebody would use this wonderful thing you built, and when you sort of broaden that perspective as to who you change the world for, you build something even bigger.
And so those were, that was from our folks at Google, right? And so I think moving forward, I think one of the things to consider is how our biases impact our practice. Okay. And so to sort of help you with that is to, one way to think about it is to understand where you stand when it comes to your biases, right? And so the folks at Harvard University, University of Virginia, and University of Washington developed what's called the Implicit Project. And it investigates the thoughts and feelings that are largely associated with the biases that are within our control, and also identify the attitudes and beliefs that we may be unwilling or unable to recognize. Okay, and so the platform that they created is a measure of implicit preference, and it predicts behavior, and it also helps you understand, more importantly, where your biases lie. Okay, and so what I'm going to have you do is actually take a test from the Implicit Project, and so I will put this assessment in the chat, and the URL will be in the chat. So I want for you to take the implicit bias test using the link that I just provided. This association test measures attitudes and beliefs that people are unwilling or unable to report. Okay, the IAT may be interesting if it shows that you have an implicit attitude that you may not even know, right? It measures your strength of associations between concepts and evaluations or stereotypes based on specific keywords. Okay, specific to this one, it is having you associate faces and terms to European American or African American origin. Okay, and so what I'm going to have you do is take the test. You have 10 minutes to complete the assessment. There are 7 parts. Each part is going to be training you and measuring you on your response based on the image or words. Okay, so keep that in mind. There are questions at the beginning and questions at the end. It is your option to go through or skip it. The other thing to keep in mind also is that I do not get any of the results. Okay, so these results are going to be shown to you. We're not going to share that out with everyone per se, but I want for you to actually take it, and then we'll go from there. So your 10 minutes starts now. All right, and so I had you take the implicit project test. More specifically, I had you take the race IAT. And I mentioned that in the chat. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in the very beginning. But the race IAT is the one that I had you take. There are others, right? And so at your leisure, you could take the other assessments. But I want for you now to take a look at the results. And there's this, before it goes into detail about the other statistics, it should tell you whether or not, well, not whether or not, but where you are placed in the spectrum from either automatically preferencing European American or African American. Okay. And so in general, the results that were posed or collected between 2002 and 2015 showed that actually a good number of people, 27% of those that participated and responded, out of over 3 million, by the way, had a moderate automatic preference for European American compared to African American. Okay. So when we look at the total group of people, the 3 million people, we have about a little over half have a moderate to strong preference, automatic preference to European American compared to African American. Okay. Why is that? I'm not going to ask for people to post in the chat or talk about it, but I want for you to think, how did that occur, right? Why did that occur? Part of it is as we look at associations, not only of words, but also of images, how fast we pushed on the keyboard and how fast we made the associations do play a part in our preference. Okay. And that's what the researchers, put out there. Right. And again, going back to this idea where our biases are malleable. When I first took this assessment, actually 2 years ago, it showed that I had a slight preference to African American compared to European American. And then last summer, that moved to the middle, where it was little to no automatic preference between African American and European American. And on Tuesday, when I was preparing for class with the other section, I moved to a moderate automatic preference for European American compared to African American. Right? Where did the results put you in? Right? Think about not only the context in which you associate with folks, but more importantly, the judgments you make as you create associations, interactions with folks. I know, either virtually or in person. Okay. Something to think about. Now, let's think about those preferences and think about all those biases as it relates to our co-op employer. Okay. And so I'm going to switch gears here for you and actually think of and put some polling questions out for you. Right. And so what I want for you to do when I launch the poll, I want you to respond yes, no, or I don't know. Okay. And so the first question is, or the first statement that I want you to rate yes, no, or I don't know to is this: my co-op employer has an official statement of diversity and inclusion. Yes, no, or I don't know. All right. So, yeah, I'm not judging, and I actually did not record the individual responses, right? But when we think about this idea of an official diversity statement within your company, it is important to know if there is one, right? Just so you know what is but their potential strategy on and promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Right? Here's the next polling question. Again, yes, no, or I don't know. My co-op employer has affinity groups for underrepresented populations. Now, what I mean by an affinity group is a group that is for support to African Americans, or support to Asians, support to disabled folks, support to LGBTQIA folks. Companies like GE Aviation, Procter and Gamble have these types of affinity groups, and they tend to provide a lot of good support for each other, but at the same time, good mentoring opportunities, right? So looks like 30s across the board. The third of you know that there are affinity groups, don't know that there aren't affinity groups at your employer, or just don't know. Again, that's fine. But again, for you all, if there is an affinity group that you could connect with, this is a great opportunity for you to not only learn about the company, but also learn about the people that are there. Okay. Final polling question for you is this. And again, yes, no, or I don't know. My co-op employer actively promotes diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And this could be ranging from specific hiring practices and hiring strategies to programming and and also policies and specific recognition of cultural holidays and events and things of that nature. Okay, so about 71% said yes, 1% or 5% said no, and about 24% I don't know. And again, that's fine. But I think one of the things to think about when you go back to your co-op employer is ask the question: how is the company promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace, right? So the thing I want to also bring up with you is, how does this relate to strengths? Okay, one of the things I strive to do when it comes to using the Clifton strengths is try to bring it up every so often, but at the same time also provide some connection to this curriculum. The Gallup folks have actually looked into this a lot further, and they've identified specific requirements or pillars to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And so here's a short video of what they found out.
At Gallup, we find that 3 critical elements contribute most to an inclusive environment. First, everyone has to feel respected. It's foundational. It is non-negotiable in work environments. If there's not a sense of respect, there can never be a sense of belonging and inclusion. The second element is being valued for your strengths. And so the ability for managers to not only identify, but also work intently to develop employee strengths really impacts the need for the larger inclusive environment. And then finally, there has to be a sense of trust in the organization. That third element is trusting leaders to do what is right. And without a sense of trust in not only leadership, direction, and strategy, but also trusting them to do what is right, there can't be a true sense of an inclusion culture. So you really need all 3 of those elements working together. Research has shown us time and time again the value of not only a diverse team, but the extended value of an inclusive team. So there are teams that may have diversity, but they're not able to fully leverage it. Inclusion is that critical factor that helps a diverse team really maximize their ability to be innovative, to be creative, to think about problems in a new way. And so if an organization wants to truly maximize and leverage their diversity, they must be inclusive. Otherwise, they won't yield the outcomes and the benefits that they could have from having a truly diverse and inclusive environment.
So, when we think about that a step further, right? Let's focus it back to you, right? Let's focus it back to this idea of your assumptions, both implicit and explicit, okay? But now let's start to put some structure around that, right? And so this is called the Johari window by Joseph Lufton and Harry Ingram. A lot of people say Johari, but it's actually Johari, right? There are 4 dimensions to consider here, right? The first one is what the area that you know of yourself and others know of you. That's the open quadrant, right? What is known to others but not known to the self, okay? That's the blind quadrant, okay? Right here. What you know of yourself but don't share with others is that of the hidden quadrant, okay? The most dangerous quadrant to consider is what you don't know and what others don't know of you, right? And so, I say that's dangerous because the key here is bringing what's hidden out and bringing it out in the open. When you bring it out in the open, there's greater awareness, not only for yourself, but that of others, okay? When we couple these boxes, right? When we think about what's hidden and what is blind, okay? What you know of yourself and what you know of others versus unknown to yourself and what's known by others, right? This is your opportunity to ask questions. How is my interaction influencing or negatively impacting people? How, when I speak, how is that interpreted? When I make a decision, what is the impact of that decision? Okay, so you're asking, people to interpret. When we consider your actions and behaviors and your decisions as a performance, basically what you're trying to do is affirm an interpretation of that, right? But then there's the other half of that, and that part of of yourself and know of others to the point where you hide things. Okay, hide things of yourself to others. When you do that, you're basically deciding what to share. Okay, so what part of yourself are you sharing with others? What part of your perspective are you wanting other people to understand, and what do you want them to know? Okay, when we think about our biases and our assumptions within this window, right? The key here is not only understanding what is blind to you, but also having the opportunity and controlling what you share with others. Okay, and again, the most dangerous quadrant is that of the unknown, because quite honestly, it's what you don't know and what others don't know, but then it is lurking in the background, right? And so that could be something structural, that could be something societal, but not within your specific area or sphere of influence. Okay, as you uncover that, as you know that, then it goes to questions of, are you sharing or are you asking interpretation? Okay, when we start asking interpretation, there are several things to consider when asking. Okay, and that is this: when you ask yourself specific questions, what part of your identity are you most aware of? So think about your strengths. Think about, those parts of your identity. Okay, what are you most aware of on a regular basis, right? Secondly, what part of your identity are you least aware of? Okay, and this is again known by others but not of yourself. Okay, and again, it's that idea of taking what's unknown and making it known, right? Third, what part of my identity is difficult to discuss with others, right? Again, that's that unknown piece, right? The hidden, right? And then finally, as we think about that fourth dimension, or the one I said that was the dangerous quadrant, if you will, the unknown, right? Ask yourself, when we talk about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, who is not in the discussion? Again, that's part of the unknown. When we think about the decisions you make as engineers, do you have all the factors to make a right decision? Ask yourself, who is not involved in the conversation? Who needs to be part of the conversation more than anything? Okay. And finally, I have one other company to share with you. And this company actually, really thought about who's not in the room and created this concept called allyship. And here's the last video for today.
Hello.
What's going on?
Oi.
Hi.
مرحبا أنا نوف.
Konnichiwa.
Vamos a hablar.
This is about you.
This is about us.
I'm a father of 4 amazing kids.
A dancer, but only in my bedroom.
A believer in the power of stories.
Soy bilingüe, casi trilingüe.
An engineer, a nerd.
Sou lésbica. Eu sou amiga.
Japanese, Korean.
Palestinian, a German national.
An immigrant, East Asian American woman of color.
And a Zamiltak.
あなたも私の同僚です。
We make amazing things together.
We aspire to bring joy
To the entire world.
But
You and I inhabit different worlds.
You and I have access to different spaces.
unless you've experienced it, you can never fully understand what it's like to be stuck between 2 cultures.
To pretend to be someone else in order to be safe.
To grow up in South America in Spanish, and at 19 having to relocate to the US and live in English.
To be a Black gay man from the rural South.
And be the only one in the room.
Unless you've experienced it yourself, you can never really know what it's like.
To have to listen to someone be degrading to your race and be the only person of that race in the room.
To lose friends, family, co-workers, simply because you wanted to be who you are.
To not know whether you can call the country that you love home.
To be the father of a trans daughter.
I think we all have a responsibility to make the world that we live in a little bit better. And you kind of have to start where you are.
What allyship is listening, compassion.
To immerse yourself in content and experiences and stories from groups that aren't of your own.
Anybody who sees something that isn't quite right can become an ally and help their colleagues.
When you've been through a struggle that hurt you for such a long time, I think you have this endless energy to give to others.
Anyone can be an ally, and everyone can use an ally, and you can use your privilege in the moment to extend that privilege to someone else.
I think this is what makes us human, to help others and to be empathetic.
We are all learning.
We're all learning. E tá todo mundo aprendendo.
Mabad.
Together,
Juntos.
Is one company. We can all be allies.
We can all be allies.
And that's from the folks at Netflix. And so I think in the end, think about, our assumptions, think about where they come from. Start asking the questions of, where they come from, but more importantly, how do you change, right? Do you need to change? Not saying that everyone has to change for a reason, but at some particular point in time, our assumptions are malleable, like I said, and they change based on the context that we live in. Okay. And so as we move forward, think about not only what your biases are, but how do your strengths play into that? And how do your strengths help promote the idea of allyship amongst each other? And one of the things that I'm personally going through is the idea of being a bystander in all of this. And as a bystander, what are my rights, but also my responsibilities, right? So that's something to think about on your end too, as someone that's an ally or someone that's a bystander. What are your roles? What are your responsibilities in that respect, right? So with that, thank you all. A couple of reminders for you. Next week is a recorded lecture. And so that's already posted in Canvas. And the lecture is on financial planning and financial literacy. That idea of hashtag adulting is hard, right? And so we have someone from the Bartlett Wealth Management Group who spoke to our class a couple of years ago, talk about the idea of financial literacy and financial planning after graduation. And so that's next week's lecture, and that has been posted on Canvas. When we come back into session in a couple of weeks, I believe we will be talking about salary negotiation. Okay, so hang on to that question. Thank you all for your attention and participating today, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks.